Hello, how's everybody doing?
Brad?
Hey, Mike,
Hey, Brad.
Neil, Randy.
Oh,
Look at them,
hi.
they're all coming in all at once.
All over the country, man. You ask us, we show up.
Good morning, good afternoon. Sorry, good afternoon, Nancy. I was thinking still. Randy, you're almost over the noon hump. Not quite yet, are you? What is it?
He can't hear. I mean, it's on the mute.
Yeah,
Morning in Spokane.
it's morning in Spokane. There
Ah,
we go. Good morning, Shelley.
Cup of coffee.
Good, good. All right, let's
Still morning here for 10 minutes, Brad.
10 more minutes. Okay. I was thinking somebody was. Mike, it looks like, I don't remember the beard. Is that a quarantine beard?
This is a COVID beard. Yes, correct. Yeah.
you
Matches my
wear
hair.
it. You wear it well.
You do. Looks real good.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mike,
Fun.
good afternoon to you too.
Hey guys.
So I think we're just waiting on Margie from San Antonio. Nancy, you doing well?
Doing well, thank you.
Good, good. You sound good. You're coming through good. So we're getting there. Oh, let's see. Okay, good deal. So if it's okay, I'm going to wait just 2 more minutes to see if we get Margie, and then I'll quickly kind of run through how we're going to attempt to make this flow. But I am fully prepared to wing it and let it go as is and not overstructure it if it's running smoothly. So I'll try to stay out of the way unless it seems to be helpful. So Randy, I take it you're probably enjoying some nice weather.
It's beautiful here. It'll be in the mid 80s this afternoon. And I just finished a 20-mile bike ride before getting on this. Well, before a shower and getting on this.
Okay, there you go.
It's on Zoom.
You know, I hated to leave the Midwest, but boy, am I glad we moved out of the Midwest before COVID hit. I'm glad to be in South Carolina this time of year. This has been fun. All right. So Daniela, are you somewhere in the background? Maybe you're
I am
on.
here.
Okay.
I am
great.
here. I am the Council on Foundations. I'm the entire entity.
There you go. So just so you all know, if you, I believe it's right click, isn't it? If you go into the participant list if you go into the participant list, there's a button right next to mute. It says more. If you have any desire to rename yourself or add your community foundation behind your name, that sometimes is really helpful just to identify where you're coming from. So Randy's got his Albuquerque symbol. So any of our folks who are familiar with aviation, they'll know exactly
Brad,
where
who are we
he's
still
from.
waiting for? My apologies.
No, you're fine. I believe it's just Margie French from the San Antonio Area Foundation.
She just joined. I'm just letting people in manually.
Oh, gotcha. Great.
And so I think
Yeah.
Margie just connected via video, and she should connect via. Margie, do you hear us?
Yes.
Great. Awesome.
Hi, Margie.
Hi.
How are you? Good to see you. Thanks for
see you.
being here. So we've now got the core group here who's going to help me pivot conversation as needed. My approach to this was going to be to let Mike Batchelor, where's Mike? There he is. You guys shift around on me and then you'll shift again as everybody else comes in. But Mike's going to say a few quick words in the beginning to just give people a little background to the reformation of CEONet, and he'll give us a quick glimpse of where they stand. And then we're going to turn it over to the crowd. And I'm going to invite folks to actively engage, sharing their responses, their suggestions in the conversation by utilizing the feature at the bottom, I believe it is, where you can raise your hand, or I'm going to ask them to give me some kind of signal. And then I will do my best to bring people into the conversation. And if I see a raised hand, I'll say, Mike, you got something to add there. And then when Mike's all wrapped up, I'll try to pivot to someone else. If there's at all a lull, or we're going too deep into the weeds, or we're just on a topic for too long, I might jump in and ask then to shift the conversation to a new topic. And that's where we did flag some for you ahead of time. And so if we can, Neil, my goal is to actually kick off with the question around the racial and marginalized disparities that the data is showing.
Okay.
And I'd like to maybe just start with you, just react however you wish, or provide some examples of how you all are serving vulnerable populations, or responding to the real data that's coming out about racial disparities in marginalized populations. And once Neil does, anyone else can jump in and keep that conversation moving. You can either respond directly to something Neil said, or you can add to. We'll use the chat feature as well. I'll do my very best to say, if I'm going to try to transition and I'm going to jump over to Nancy, I'll try to use the chat feature to let Nancy know that my goal is to bring her in next. But just be advised that this can move sideways quickly, and so we'll adapt as necessary to make it free-flowing as best we can and not overly scripted. Thoughts, comments, questions about that?
Brad, on my piece, somebody's going to be running the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Slides.
So here shortly, Danielle is going to bring up the initial screen that just is some guidance for utilizing Zoom for anybody who's not as familiar with it. Although now it seems like majority of the country is becoming familiar with Zoom, all the way down to our grade school kids. But Mike, what we can do is you can just tell her next slide, or and she'll gladly move it forward.
Well.
And then once we're wrapped up with that, we'll remove it so that more screen space is devoted to sharing the screen with videos so that people can see each other as they speak. I probably will keep it on gallery view just so that I can see more of the action. But feel free to set it however you want, whether you prefer it on gallery or speaker view. Anything else? That was a good one. I'm just excited, I'll say that, to have this much perspective. It was really nice of you all to give us not only the time, but also your talent, and just trying to create some space for the field to connect in these fun times. I have to say, every time we cancel another in-person event, like, a part of me just slowly gets a little sadder. We're now canceling the summer trips, and I just keep thinking that I don't know. I'm adjusting like all of us, but
We'll keep you social, Brad. We'll
that's
do
right.
it.
Well,
We'll keep you social.
I just got visited by my 2-year-old. Apparently nap time's over. Nap time's over.
So folks, I'm going to share my screen now that has the main title. And as Brad said, I'll just quickly go through some of the reminders, and then I'll pivot to Brad. But I'm going to start admitting people now. So if everybody could just mute themselves, and then we'll get started in a few minutes. I'm going to start letting, oh, hi, Carter. I'm just going to start letting a few folks in. Isn't he cute? He's super cute. All right. Let me see 1 second. All right, so I'm going to start opening it up now. So please put yourselves on mute. Thank you.
welcome for all of you who are just joining us. Welcome. Thanks for being here. We're going to get started in just a few short minutes. For the time being, I just wanted to make you aware that if you click on the participant list, you can scroll over your name and you'll see a little button that says more on it. And that allows you to actually change your name or rename the tag that comes with it. And if you'd like, it's helpful when you identify your community foundation, similar to, as you might see Diana's, it says Grand Rapids next to it. That's sometimes helpful just to know where people are chiming in from, what parts of the country. So again, if you go into the participant list, you're able to change your name. You can add the name of your foundation right afterwards, just to help us identify. We'll be getting started here shortly.
Welcome everyone to the Community Foundations CEO Virtual Roundtable. It's being hosted by the Council on Foundations and CEONet. Just before we get started, just a few reminders. For folks that don't have their video on, we would love to be able to see you and engage with you. If for some reason you can't, just feel free to use the chat feature within the menu of this call to submit any comments or questions. We're also asking folks to add your organization name next to your name. It helps us know who's speaking and everybody else that's on the call know who's on the call and who your peers are. And then finally, we also ask that folks, if you have questions, it's a lot easier for us to monitor who would like to speak next if you use the raise your hand feature. You will find that if you hover over the participant at the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to see everybody's names. You'll be able to rename your name in that same screen. And at the bottom, there's a raise your hand feature. If for some reason you don't see it and you can't use it, feel free to use the chat box to submit your comments or questions. But we do encourage folks to speak up. I'll be scanning for folks that want to raise your hands. If you want to visually raise your hand, I'll be tracking those as well. Thank you again for being here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brad.
Thank you, Daniela. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Very nice to have you spending a little bit of time with us today. I'm going to allow us to jump right in, and we're going to start with Mike Batchelor. He's the CEO over at the Erie Community Foundation in Erie, Pennsylvania. He's going to tell us a little bit about our CEONet, which is partnering with us to make these possible, and give us a little bit of light about what's happening here with the affinity group CEONet. So Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Brad, and thanks for the council for giving us this opportunity. I hope everyone around the country is doing well, and I know you're all working hard to help your individual communities during these trying times. I've been asked by the organizing committee, which you see here, to spend a few minutes talking to you about CEONet, an effort to revitalize an affinity group dedicated to connecting and serving CEOs across the country. Next slide. So some of you may not know that we had a CEONet. This was originally formed back in the late 90s, and I know some people on the call were part of this, as I was when we first established this. For many years, it hosted standalone CEO retreats attended by a wide variety of foundations, large and small. We also did CEO-only sessions in advance of some council fall conferences. For a number of reasons, these conferences were discontinued in 2014. Groups of us continued to work with the Kansas Association of Community Foundations to do CEO-only pre-conference retreats. Next slide, please. So what's the revitalization look like? A lot of us feel this need never left us, and I think COVID demonstrates the need to connect community foundations and learn from one another and support each other more than ever. We got a major lift when CF Insights decided to agree to do a survey of community foundation CEO professional development needs in 2018. We formed an organizing committee. I will say we've had great support from Brad and the council. We are forming an advisory committee. Significantly, we have drafted bylaws and governing documents. Community Giving in St. Cloud is agreed to be our backbone support organization. And we had an initial retreat planned and a CEO launch for the CF United conference in Detroit. Of course, that got postponed and canceled because of COVID. So what's our vision for this? Small staff, small budget, small dues, big impact. We don't see this as a large organization by any means. The focus is to gather us, to share, help us share, to learn from one another, and when possible, to act collectively. Gather, share, learn, and act. We see in-person retreats and some virtual programming, and the focus is on building a sense of community among community foundation CEOs all over the country. Next slide, please. Why? Why do we feel this is needed? Well, I think all of us agree we've got great jobs, but they're very unique jobs. And in some parts of the country, not all parts, it's a lonely job. There aren't other community foundation CEOs you could easily talk with and share. Those of us that have staffs might have all of our staff involved in professional development affinity groups, AdNet, ProNet, FOG. Why don't we have one for CEOs? We do feel we can all learn from each other, and in those situations where you can act together, not always, but when you can, we can multiply our impact. So what's the next steps? Where do we head from here? We are developing a budget, a dues structure, and a 2021 action plan. We do view this as a very low membership dues organization. We're hoping for possible voluntary contributions from some of the larger community foundations, or what we're calling founding members. We want to recruit memberships, recruit an advisory board, develop a program committee, plan some webinars, and we hope to have our first rebooted retreat get together sometime in early 2021. So this is open to all. Again, we are very grateful to Brad and the council for their support of this, but you don't have to be a member of the council. If you want to get involved, you could volunteer for the advisory board or a program committee. We're hoping we can recruit some founding members. Our foundation will do this to give $1,000 as a founding member. If you have any questions, you could contact any member of the organizing committee. And I guess most importantly, plan this in your budgets for 2021. We're projecting annual dues at under $500, so we want this available to all. We may even implement a sliding fee schedule. And again, we're hoping some of the larger foundations might contribute a bit more. Next slide. So thanks to all of you for all of the work you're doing. Some of you know I've been in this field for 30 years, and I continue to be inspired by community foundations all over the country. You're all doing great work. Think how much stronger we could be if we had a nationwide network to help us all gather, share, learn, and when possible, act together. So with that, I will thank Brad for this opportunity and turn it back over.
All right, thank you. So everyone, once again, I'm going to keep you on speak or gallery view so that I can see as many of you as possible. So this is going to be as informal as possible. I do have some friends that were willing to help us get the conversation started. So I'll mention real quickly, Neil from Ann Arbor. He's somewhere on this screen. There he is. And I want to thank Randy from Albuquerque Community Foundation, Eileen over in Northern Virginia, Shelley in Anovia in Spokane, Washington, Margie French down in San Antonio, Nancy Anthony in Oklahoma City, Mike Gorehouse in Holland, Zeeland area in Michigan, and Diana Seeker in Michigan in Grand Rapids. So they were kind enough to just help us pivot, move the conversation, but by no means will they be here to monopolize. Anyone can participate. As Daniela said, I will try to use a somewhat moderated format by asking you to just raise your hand on the digital format through Zoom, or just wave to me, give me something if you're on video, and I'll do my best to bring you into this conversation. With that, I want to get started, and I'm actually going to toss this over to Neil. Neil was kind enough to just help us get started. Neil, the topic that has been brought up and been brought to the council's attention on numerous occasions is, especially when you look at the data, we are very clearly seeing that COVID is, while it is affecting all of us, it has some racial tones, it has some marginalized tones, it's affecting populations differently. And so in particular, I was just curious what you're seeing, what you're doing to serve those most vulnerable, to take into effect the racial disparities that we're seeing and think through how to support marginalized communities. So Neil, I'll throw it over to you.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate it. And greetings from Ann Arbor. I'm compelled, since you guys have video, to show you where we are in the great state of Michigan as a native Michigander. You don't need Google. You've got my hand right here. So yeah, Brad, our local county data tracks the disparities we've all been reading about nationally. Our local data shows disparate African-American infection and hospitalization rates. And we also have data showing disparities based on income. For us, geography, there's an east side, west side divide in our county, and age as well. So part of our response has been to shine a light on these disparities and continually share them with the greater community. We've lost a lot of media resources in our county, so we see ourselves as an important conduit for that kind of information. We've of course responded through proactive grant making. We're targeting nonprofits that serve marginalized communities and, more important, are run by marginalized communities. But I wanted to just share our biggest leap. We've been activating some less formal neighborhood networks. In addition to working with nonprofits, we've been cultivating those networks for the last 5 years. They were intended to elevate the voice of the very people we've been purporting to help all these years. We wanted to enable them to prioritize how our grants can make the biggest impacts on their lives. We're just starting to move money now through those networks, which we hadn't done before based on the crisis. So I wanted to share that, but also just pose a question for everyone, because we're still in learning mode. I'd love to hear from others on how you're responding through action to racial disparities or other disparities that are acute in your communities. And also I want to frame that as absolutely during the crisis, but I'm starting to think about how we frame these disparities during the recovery period that could last for years. How are you turning your awareness into action? Is it grant strategies? Is it communications? Is it changes within your foundations? Thanks for your ideas and insights.
Those are really good posed questions. And again, use the raised hand, give me some kind of signal if you want to participate. I'm actually going to ask Randy. Randy, you have a marginalized population in terms of the Native American population. I'm very curious. Certainly that has had to have been a little bit of a different strategy to approach those communities in this time. I suspect that looks very similar in some of our rural communities. So I see some hands, I'll bring them into the conversation here next. But Randy?
Sure. In New Mexico, on a per capita basis, we have the largest Native American population in the United States. Part of that is the Navajo Nation, which I'm sure everybody has heard something about on national television. That is on the western side of our state, extending into Arizona. 40% of COVID cases are Native American in New Mexico, and yet only 10% of our population is Native American. So very disparate. The challenges too is there are a handful of nonprofits that have traditional relationships with Native communities, but not nearly enough. And so what we've been actually doing is working directly with tribal leadership and making grants directly into tribal leadership, along with grants to those nonprofits that have been serving. We have 20 Native American tribes in New Mexico, 6 of them in the greater Albuquerque metropolitan area, which is 4 counties, and which is 1 million people of the total 2.1 million people in our state. So you can see it's very rural. What we've learned is, it's so easy to listen on national television that if someone in your family gets the virus, you need to isolate them. Well, that is often impossible in the Native communities because it is very typical for 3 generations to be living in one small space. And so there's been great challenge in terms of isolating cases of COVID on tribal lands.
Thanks, Randy. Shelley, you cover up in Spokane, Washington, probably, I think you said a 20 county radius. I know that not all that's high populations, that's a lot of rural. How's this translating to supporting those that are away from hospitals, they're away from some, metropolitan centers? Just curious from a rural perspective, your take on this and what you're activating.
Perfect. Yeah, we do. We serve 20 counties in 2 states and cover about 40,000 square miles. All of that is rural except for Spokane and Coeur d'Alene. And so just 2 pieces of that. We had developed out leadership councils for our entire 20 county region so that we were not making our decisions from Spokane for our rural communities. And then we'd also have been leading the census work in Eastern Washington for this past year. And so had a diverse group of folks that had come together to lead that work. So as we have looked at our grant making strategy for our COVID funds, we actually in Spokane, we saw that our dollars were going through our donor advice funds. We saw they were going to all of our large nonprofits. And so we took our dollars for Spokane County and actually distributed them with the advice of our census committee that we had pulled together. And so for the first time we are funding the Ministerial Alliance for churches, for our Slavic networks. We have a huge refugee population here in Spokane that I don't think many know about, but so we actually our first round of grants in Spokane actually went to almost all non-traditional organizations and grassroots networks. And then in our rural communities, we utilized our leadership councils and we did a survey. We put out a survey for the entire 20 county region that we could break down by county. And anyone could fill it out. It was very simple, a couple of questions. And then it was our leadership councils that actually made the decisions on where the grant dollars went into their communities. And to see folks come together in a way that they'd never had to come together and work together before was actually very inspiring. And we were able to get dollars into those diverse populations that were not necessarily on our radar screen as typical nonprofits serving communities, but actually I'd say 90% of our dollars went into non-traditional organizations through this first round of grants.
Thank you. That's a helpful insight. Diana, you had raised your hand when Neil started tossing out some questions, but maybe you wanted to weigh in?
Just wanted really quickly. Now Neil's here, I'm over here, and the good side of the state. I just wanted to say really quickly, we are definitely using the equity lens for our funding and have been for quite some time. The thing that, and I appreciate what Shelley and Neil have said, we too are funding through networks and different ways that we never would have imagined funding. One of them now is serving as a repository for the Mutual Aid Society and other movements to collect money It's called the La Lucha Fund, and we're funneling the funding along with $100,000 of ours to our Hispanic Center of Western Michigan, who will then provide direct cash assistance to undocumented families and those that are unbanked or a mixed status. So, you know, that is not something that it is definitely a necessary pivot, and not many of foundations are willing to do that, but it's absolutely necessary.
We're going to learn a lot on this call. We're also going to understand Michigan geography by the time we're over, so hang tight. You'll see some more of that coming up. Thank you for all of that. I really appreciate it. Just a reminder, raise your hand. I see Margie has popped in, so I'm going to bring her into the conversation. You can raise your hand. You can try to flag me down. And if it's easier, you can use gallery view. Speaker view, which allows you to zoom in on an individual. I tend to stay with the gallery view so that I can see all of you. But just a quick point that my team was pointing out. Margie, you wanted to chime in?
I'm just not sure I can get Texas on my hand. It's just so big. We're just kidding, my Michigan friends there. We in San Antonio has a sad designation. We are the poorest large city in the nation. We are also 65% Hispanic. And so we moved in our grant cycle to focus on the poorest zip codes in our city. And we did that by changing our scoring system and our responsive grant making. So we already had the mechanism in place to really reach more of those folks who live in poverty. Now that COVID-19 is upon us, we created a COVID-19 relief fund in collaboration with United Way and some of the other larger foundations in San Antonio. The fund is housed in the San Antonio Area Foundation. And so my grants team already scores the applications that are coming in very rapidly into the foundation. And so far we have granted out $3.9 million. And because to 129 nonprofits. And because we had that scoring system, we are so happy to say that we know that the majority of the grants have gone to the 17 poorest zip codes in the city. So.
Thanks, Margie. Nancy Anthony coming in from Oklahoma City, maybe if I could call on you and maybe we could just back this up a little bit and think in a more macro terms. You know, you've been through a couple different forms of recessions that have impacted the operations of your foundation, have impacted your community. I would just be curious to your perspective on the long-term recovery that's ahead and how you're framing it, how you're thinking about it. So maybe you could just kick us off on thinking a little bit about that.
Thank you very much. Yes, my experience goes back too far. We just memorialized the 25th anniversary of the bombing in Oklahoma City, which was our first introduction into actually working in disasters. And subsequent to that, we've had two pretty significant tornadoes in the last 20 years, and now we have this crisis. It's interesting to me to see how disasters unfold because they're very similar in the sense that there's a great deal of, for lack of a better term, frenzy and just willy-nilly, just lots of things going on. I said the reason that they say, well, why don't we do things in a better way? I said, well, that's why they call it a disaster, because if you could have planned for it, you wouldn't be doing it the way you are. And so there's a whole lot of reaction of people immediately, and Americans and Oklahomans are all incredibly responsive to want to help in some way, and sometimes that help gets scattered out and doesn't necessarily always get to strategically the best place, but it is important that everyone participate. But at some point, you need to begin to think beyond the the moment and think about next week or in maybe next month. And I think that's one of the things I've sort of learned about having gone through this 2 or 3 times, is that the recovery is a much longer time than the initial emergency. Now, obviously, when you have a burning building, it's really important to get people out of the building, and sometimes that's what we initially do. But after it's over, you have to figure out how to put the building back in place and figure out what's going to go on there. And I think it's really important as we utilize the resources that we have to respond to what I call the burning building, we really need to also think through what's going to happen next, and at least think through. I think it's really important for organizations, nonprofit organizations especially, to get their boards involved in those kinds of thought processes. Lots of times staff are so involved in the heat of the battle and so involved in dealing with the emergency right now that they don't think beyond right now. And so it's just important. I think we've learned a lot in that over time, that the recovery is long and you need to prepare for it, and it's not very exciting, but it is an important part of that. So I would encourage people to take a step back. In Oklahoma City right now, we've exhausted probably about 70 or 80% of our initial giving from emergencies. And I think we also want to, instead of necessarily recruiting more dollars, to think through how can we encourage organizations to solicit dollars that will help them eventually recover, not necessarily just deal with the moment right now. Although, people do need to be fed, they do need to be housed, and it's really important to try to take care of those immediate needs, but we also need to think about going forward.
Thanks, Nancy. And again, anyone feel free to jump in here, raise your hand, or let me know. I welcome your all's perspective. It certainly does seem, at least from the council's perspective, we're hearing more and more of you starting to shift to long-term recovery and long-term thinking again. And it's no secret that scholarships seem to be on everybody's mind, because that's all the legal questions we're getting right now is scholarships. So there is some level of normalcy that is creeping into some of the work that you're doing remotely and from home. I would like to stay focused on COVID for just a little bit longer, and I might pop back over to Randy one more time if I could pull Randy from Albuquerque in. I'm thinking specifically about small businesses. This is a relatively new territory for most community foundations. They've worked in entrepreneurial spaces, they've worked on Main Street programs, but the actual support of small business and making forgivable grants and recoverable grants, that seems to be fairly new in my book. Curious, you've run into some of this, if you could just give us a sense of how that's shaping up. And then anyone else that's dealing with small businesses would love to hear your perspective, because that's an important one here. Randy?
Sure, I'll preface my remarks by stating that it's been 6 years since we created a new field of interest at the Albuquerque Community Foundation that we call Economic and Workforce Development. So we've had a lot of years to develop networks and to develop trust with what we really refer to here in New Mexico as micro business. So focusing on businesses that are 5 employees or less, and entrepreneurial businesses. They are the most marginalized of small businesses, and typically, I think in every state, but especially in New Mexico, they're typically Latino, Native American, and Asian businesses. And so what we have done, I think, fairly effectively over these last 6 years is develop some very strong relationships with entrepreneurial support organizations. You may see the acronym ESO used, and these are organizations that are set up specifically to work with small, micro, and entrepreneurial businesses who are traditionally unbanked. And so a lot of our focus during COVID has been partnering with those organizations, in particular to fund those organizations to staff up to be able to process applications for the PPP program. Because these business organizations are traditionally unbanked, even though the SBA was telling traditional lending institutions you need to take non-clients, they were loaded up first with their clients, and there really was no opportunity for these small, micro, and entrepreneurial businesses. So we've also developed over the years a good network with donor-advised fund holders that are passionate about economic and workforce development. And so we brought them right into the loop. And yesterday in particular, as the second wave of PPP funding was released, we were able to send nearly $100,000 to one of our entrepreneurial support organizations that was going to be processing these loans for small business. We are prepared if the need arises to make grants directly to these small businesses, but at this point we've been able to effectively meet some of the needs through our entrepreneurial support organizations.
Thank you. And we've got some really great resources at cof.org on how to grant to small businesses that was pulled together from myself and our legal team, vetted through ideas that you in the field are working through. So feel free to check that out. I want to quickly bring in Julie. Julie, you're with Fox River Valley, if I'm remembering correctly, in Illinois. You had raised your hand. Maybe you've got some experience in the small business lane.
Well, actually, I was raising my hand in response to Nancy's original conversation. But first of all, I just want to thank you to all the president and CEOs that are on this network and for sharing your expertise, because I'm new to this position. I've been at the Community Foundation for 5 years, but I'm in just a few months as the president and CEO. So nice time to get started in terms of, you know, dealing with this crisis right now. But one of the things that we have been looking at is how do we help partner and work with our nonprofits, you know, for this long-term recovery. And in doing so, are there ways that we can strategically help them partner with one another? We've seen an emphasis on nonprofits merging with one another or finding strategic partnerships with one another. And we have a feeling in this community that most likely there will be some nonprofits that won't be able to sustain their operations on their own anymore. And I was curious if other community foundations are looking at those kind of sustainability initiatives, because I do see that as a way that, you know, we could play a role down the road in terms of this recovery, because there will be some that need assistance in really building their capacity.
Anyone specifically, that's a great question, thinking about sustainability, thinking about the nonprofits, mergers, having gone through a community foundation merger myself. It's quite an ordeal.
I'll just respond briefly. I think it's a challenge unless you have some incentives. We've tried to do some grant making that require people to work together and for there to be partners in actually addressing issues. And in fact, recently have worked with trying to stand up a shelter for the homeless population in Oklahoma City that is symptomatic but can't go to any of the other shelters. And so it's been interesting to put together several groups of people to try to address that issue. Everybody has something to bring to the table, and we all shared in the benefit from it, but it was a lot of work. And so you know, there's just a lot of ego out there and nobody wants to ever give up. But I think sometimes you have to sort of say, what's the greater good, and see if you can tee that up, has been my experience.
Shelley, you want to hop in?
I was just going to mention that we are addressing that as we're partnering with Empire Health Foundation, which is a hospital conversion foundation that serves the Eastern Washington region with us. And we are jointly funding 2 individuals that are consultants. One will as a grant writer to support our nonprofits moving forward, and the other is actually a strategic consultant. His expertise is in organizational development, because we realize that there will be quite a few mergers or shakes up of our nonprofit community. And so we're jointly funding those 2 positions this next year to help our nonprofit community.
Thank you. I'm going to pop in and ask, I'm going to pop over to Sandy from Clemens Community Foundation. Sandy, if you're in there, I think you had something on the small businesses.
Yes, I do. Hello, and sorry, my video is not on, but we too were concerned about small businesses, small nonprofits. So what we did is we contacted the Chamber of Commerce and the Small Business Center with the community college, and we formed a partnership. We gave a small grant to the chamber and started a resource navigator program. And we have attorneys, CPAs, bankers who are volunteering their time to give voice, since so many of the small businesses, they can't even reach somebody to ask them questions, and there's so much information coming out and it's changing daily. So we know that their stress level is already pretty high, and then to not be able to get good information or even talk to someone, we thought this was a good strategy. It just kicked off last week. We are getting calls, and so we have someone also from the employment service who's serving as a navigator. So folks can call, make an appointment, and they have an opportunity to actually talk with a real person who can give them some insight as to what's happening within the state, where things stand, how they can best prepare, how they can access the resources available. So it's really been a good support.
Thank you, Sandy. I do want to comment, and thanks those of you who are commenting in the group chat. There's some insight there. So if you're not monitoring the chat, please do. If you have resources that you want to flag or share that have been helpful to you or could be of reference as we're speaking, use the chat feature to share those. I wanted to, since we were talking about, and again, I'm happy to continue to talk about small business for those who want to jump in and raise their hand. But Eileen Ellsworth over in Northern Virginia, certainly this was on your radar, small businesses, but you've continued to been able to stay in the nonprofit lane. Curious to just sort of what helped you decide that. What were some of the factors that you were weighing to feel confident that that was being properly covered? And then what are you doing particularly in the support of nonprofits financially and operationally?
Yeah, so we launched a COVID-19 response fund. We've given 3 rounds, all of it to nonprofits. The first 2 rounds were for basic needs assistance, emergency financial assistance, and the last round focused on primary day-to-day healthcare, mental health care, dental care, and organizations that were providing services to victims of domestic violence, because it's soaring both nationally and locally. And we took a really hard look at grant making to benefit small business. I spoke to a lot of people. We're trying to find the right intermediaries. We don't feel comfortable making grants directly to individuals or small businesses. We just don't feel that's our sweet spot. So instead, we were looking at CDFIs, who turned out to be pretty expensive, actually. They wanted to charge 10% of everything we gave them, which seemed like a lot. And we did make 1 or 2 grants to a couple of our local workforce development boards they were perfect intermediaries. They were already set up to make grants and loans to very small businesses, especially in our immigrant community here, is very large. So we did veer away from that, but we're taking a very serious look at what's next. And I wouldn't say it's long range. I would say it's sort of intermediate range. And we're looking at data. What the country needs in terms of more data on testing, both COVID-19 testing and antibody testing, is exactly what our local business community feels it needs to restart the economy here. I mean, you have to know when you can get people back to work and in ways that aren't literally risking their lives. So we're now talking to a couple of local universities and inviting grant applications for data platforms that are going to be basically open community data platforms on COVID-19 and its impact in the region. data that's going to aggregate the region's healthcare, various healthcare resource utilization and capacity numbers, data that's going to help scale up testing availability and public health results reporting, and data that's going to be de-identified so that it can be used by the greater community and by researchers and by business to determine, what percentage of the population may already be immune. And I'll just share with you one of our recent insights, which absolutely blew me away. I was talking to the lead epidemiologist in one of our regions, and she was talking to me about the lack of availability for COVID-19 testing. So I asked her about antibody testing, and her response was, well, we don't need that. She said, that data just tells us who's already had the disease and recovered. And the insight that I had there was, she's a doctor, right? And they're trained to heal the sick. So data about who's already recovered doesn't help them do their job. But the business community is the one that needs to know who's got immunity. We're not going to get that answer from our hospital systems, and we're going to have to figure out a way to get it through other data sources.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Eileen. Mike Kane, I think you were on here earlier. I think I saw you. If you're in, I was curious, you were contemplating working directly with employee assistance programs or workforce. Do you have an update on that at all, how that's played out or what was being contemplated? You're muted. I think I found you. I want to make sure you're unmuted here.
Sorry. Yeah, I do, and I don't have really good news on that. We went to the local career link and talked about the idea of connecting to help underemployed people and with who were not benefiting from the increase in unemployment, and they felt that it was just going to be too hard in their system to figure out how to plug us in, and they were afraid of managing sort of third-party money, so we didn't get anywhere with that.
Okay.
What we have looked at, if I could just say, and with our COVID fund, we've supported a lot of immediate needs such as food and first responders, including volunteer fire companies and EMS places that have lost a lot of revenue. I've met with a couple of small businesses, and we're formulating right now with our remaining money and seeking more money to look at, for those small businesses, I include nonprofits in this, by the way, who have spent, when they get who have been approved for the PPP forgivable loan, they're going to get that loan, and then they're going to have a runway of about 2.5 months. That's going to help them get started, but that's not going to help them build their business back up. And they think there's going to be the equivalent of a valley of death between when the PPP loan runs out and when they're able to ratchet their sales back up or their revenue back up in the case of nonprofits. So I've got a couple business people I'm looking at talking about this, and I'm talking with the local economic development agency whether we can create a fund to help at that point. And so that point would happen, in the summer sometime, later in the summer, early fall, where perhaps some of our dollars could really have the best impact in getting our community's economy running again. And as I said, that would include both foreign nonprofits. We're looking at the nonprofits as small businesses in their own right. Mm-hmm. So I'll be happy to let people know if they're interested how that goes. But that's what we're thinking about right now moving forward.
Thank you. I wanted to maybe chime in on some specific industries that seem to be obviously hard pressed to hear how it's playing out across the country. I'm thinking of healthcare providers, especially in rural contexts. Entire business models are failing when all elective surgeries have been eliminated from the revenue call. Childcare continues to be an issue and is going to be a greater issue. Maybe I could chime in or have Shelley chime in to just get us started at Innovia. I know that you've at least been thinking a little bit about these hard-pressed areas when you look at your broad spectrum of your region, but just comments on some of the hardest hit industries and thoughts around that. And I welcome others to join this conversation as well. Shelley?
So we have almost 40 hospitals in our 20 county region. Obviously, the majority of them, 25 beds or under. And so it's actually been a conversation that we went from speaking to our hospitals to recognizing that there's not enough money to solve their budget problems. And we switched to an advocacy focus, and actually have worked very closely with our federal delegation and with our state legislature on supporting, in both states, on supporting our rural hospitals. And that has been actually successful on multiple levels. They still have long-term issues, but I think we all recognize that we can't lose our rural hospitals in our region. So we've addressed the advocacy piece. We've actually funded some of our rural EMS providers, because it can be an hour or more, hour and a half between a rural town to the nearest hospital. And so we funded some of our EMS services to make sure that they had the proper equipment to make those transports. We have inside Spokane County and Coeur d'Alene, they've actually used our school districts to provide childcare, but outside of these two counties, in the rural communities, the schools haven't been able to step up to that role. And so we funded our some of our different, like our Boys and Girls Clubs and our different youth serving organizations to provide childcare for our healthcare workers and our essential workers in our rural communities. So we've taken a broad approach throughout the region.
Thanks, Shelley. Margie, maybe just thinking from a city perspective, San Antonio, you've got a strong military presence there, so you've got people that have to be working. You've clearly got frontline workers, healthcare workers, all still working. How is all this playing out in your city?
Well, we've been really hit hard in our hospitality workforce. San Antonio is a wonderful tourist destination, as you all may know. And so all of those laid off hospitality and restaurant workers are really suffering right now. So one of the things that we've invested in is a thing called Get Shift Done. And with our local food bank, it actually pays laid off hospitality and restaurant workers to go over and help out the San Antonio area food bank. And so we are funding it along with the United Way, that's really working with the application to get those checks out to those laid off workers. Additionally, early on, we invested in a child care center for essential workers. And we've been able to raise significant funds to be able to help out those essential workers who need childcare.
Thank you, Margie. It's 2:45. This is normally where I recommend we pour a whiskey, or oh, I'm sorry, that's a happy hour, wrong Zoom. No, I want to be mindful of the time. I want to be mindful of you all. These last 15 minutes, what I'd like to do is focus in a bit more on the operations. You've all been amazing at sharing what you're doing for your communities and how you're thinking creatively to orchestrate grant making and so forth, and convening in a social distancing fashion. But let's maybe just get real a bit about the dynamics of managing a team, managing a staff, for those of you who have larger staffs, whether it's 3 people or 30 people. But HR is now functioning in a whole different manner. And there's some tactical issues that I'm sure you're adapting to in terms of HR and so forth. Diana, if I could maybe start with you, just generally operating speaking, what's top of mind? What's most pressing? What's most challenging right now?
Well, I'm sure for some community foundations applying for and receiving the loan through the PPP, but our focus has been how do we keep our staff vibrant, alive, and whatnot. And we are normal. We have what I would say we're using an app called Teams, which many of you likely are using as our hub. And we are entering the time when we would do performance reviews, and we're still planning on doing that. So that does occur. And the piece on human resources is that it's really topping the list with regard to, we still need to not only do performance reviews, but we also need to be mindful about, do we have the financial resources to keep staff employed? And so we're working through a number of scenarios. Back during the recession, we made it absolutely essential that we would not lay anybody off. And that's our mantra now as well. So being very careful with our internal budget, and really seeking, I think, suggestions from our staff as to how to keep how to keep themselves mentally and emotionally healthy. The thing that is that we're looking at, in fact, at 4 o'clock today, a discussion with my management team, is how do you use the capacity of some of the staff who are not as active as others, such as the receptionist, and yet and being involved with that. So that is going to be our challenge of how do you redeploy various functions in the organization, but really wanted to keep a good eye on the fact that our investment performances are all going down. We're still actively fundraising, and the community is responding quite well. We have a recovery fund, which we named it that way, while we're also supporting the emergency fund at United Way. So it's I would say keeping the human resource function top of mind is absolutely essential.
I mean, we got to just get as many Michigan folks as we can here. Carla from Fremont, I think you raised your hand. I'd love to maybe have you chime in. I think I saw a hand raised. Maybe I didn't.
Yes, I did raise my hand.
Thank you.
You know, I would echo a lot of what people have said, and particularly what Diana just said about the HR functions. We felt very early on that we were in a position to keep our staff, and that keeping our staff was really primary for us. We're in a rural area. It's really hard to recruit and retain good staff as it is. So we really early, when this first started, we immediately gave our staff 2 weeks of sick leave. And we did that in order to make them feel comfortable that they could do what they needed to do and have some extra time off. And we said, this is sick leave, but think of it as flexible leave for doing what you need to do with your life. We also let them know really early that their jobs were secure, that we were not planning to lay anyone off. It is absolutely a challenge to keep everybody busy. Fortunately, we're in a software conversion to Community Suite, and so that actually provides some extra work that our people that are usually on the front desk can crunch and do at home. So it's helping our software conversion to move forward, helping us to keep those people busy. We do have the same personnel problems that we had before people started working remotely. Everybody still has the same habits and so forth that they have. Not that we have a lot of personnel problems, but I think we all always have at least a few. We also let people know that, you know, you're working remotely. We know you might not be able to work full time, and we were concerned about the people that are coming in the office. Not quite half of our staff is still coming in the office. They're working really long hours. Some of them are working more hours than I want them to. I don't know how to drag them out of their desks when I'm sitting in my home office. But we had already in place wellness leave and volunteer leave. And so we changed our wellness leave to not come out of the sick bank anymore, but just to be something that you could be paid for. We said, take care of yourselves, meditate, go out and take a walk. we'll pay for you to take care of yourself. We'll pay 8 hours of wellness leave every 2 weeks. You can just take that. And then our people that were home with children, we said, we know you need to be the teachers now. We know you need to be the teachers' aides. So we said, if you're helping your kids with their schoolwork, you can put that on your paid time. So I think that our staff is comfortable, as comfortable as they can be, because we've tried to be very generous with our flexibility, but also keeping them accountable. So in other words, you got to tell us what you did for the time that you were away. It's not just go home, maybe get some work done. We still turn in timesheets. So those are some of the things that we've put into place here.
Thank you, Carla. Mike from Holland, New Zealand, you were raising your hand.
Yes, I wish I was from New Zealand, but just the Holland, New Zealand area, also in Michigan. No, you're good, Brad. No, I just want to add to what my colleagues Diana and Carla have said. And Carla, I think your structure is what I really appreciate, because we're trying to give that flexibility, but you just made it as part of your structure to make it less informal. And I really appreciate that. And I'm sure your employees as well do as well. What I'd like to add to the conversation is one thing early on that just happened a little bit naturally for us, but I think it's been a good thing for our team, is we've tried really hard without putting pressure on people to feel like they have to perform at some crazy high level. We've tried to make sure everyone's embraced the fact that this is our time to shine. So the Community Foundation pitch, for the long term is trust us with resources to respond to the unknown future needs of the community. Flexibility matters because we don't know what those needs are going to be. We have all this pitch over and over and over. And it's for this. And so for us, our team has really been energized by that. It's been about thinking differently. Diana, you mentioned repurposing staff that aren't at the front desk, but what can they do to help step up in this environment? It's having the grant making team say, hey, that thing that you wanted to try before, there was all these reasons why we couldn't try it. Well, now's the time. We got a little more cover to try that or do that. Let's throw that process out the door, or whatever it may be. But I think that mentality of just engaging differently in the community, grant making different, fundraising different, operating different, I think has been energizing the team. And I think we needed a little bit of that. There was a lot of negativity in the world. I don't want to pretend that's not out there, and there's a lot of things that are bad. But if your team feels like this is the Community Foundation's time to shine, and if we deliver right now, in 2 years or 5 years, we'll be pointing back to the creative thing that we did there, the cool way that we stepped up there, and our donors in our community will remember that. So for me, I think just getting folks rallied has been an encouraging thing.
Thank you. So you're telling me it's normal, the fact that I have a half-naked 2-year-old that runs through and a dog that barks. It's quiet, and off these open office spaces is really the way to go, friends. I mean, just invite the whole crew in, the 8-year-old and all. Mike Kane, you were with us early on, and then I'm gonna bring Francis Sheehan into the conversation. Mike? Yeah, Carla, I probably should have just done this in chat, but we found ourselves in this same sort of odd situation of doing a move from FIMS, in our case, to Community Suite right now when everybody's working remotely, which probably is not ideal. And I'd just like to suggest, I know there's some other organizations, some other of us making that move. I'd like you to feel free to email us, connect our staffs, see if we can help each other move through it, because it's as everybody knows, it's complicated, but it's a necessary and ultimately good thing, but we're right in the middle of it. So I just wanted to let you know you're not alone. Thanks, Mike. Francis?
So I want to echo, I think this is so funny, Carla, that you're doing this conversion to community suites, because so are we at the Foundation for Delaware County in Pennsylvania. We've been using the Foundant grant making software, since we started 3 years ago. And I used it at a previous foundation, and it's just so fabulous. So we're really excited about expanding to use community suites. We have been completely virtual since we started 3 years ago. And I guess that's one of the advantages of being new. I don't think I've seen a paper check in at least a year. So we were beautifully poised to all work from home. The other change that we're making, that we're taking advantage of, is looking at board management software. That's the only piece we don't have. We really want all our board members to be able to easily access old minutes and bylaws and articles, you know, all our policy documents, and set up meetings through that. So if anybody has suggestions of an affordable board management software project, product they work with, please, if you could let me know on the side, I'd be really appreciative. But I also just wanted to say on the other end, to the person who mentioned, how do I use my receptionist? I'm a really, really big believer that when you have this kind of time, and we're busier than we've ever been, you know, raising money for this response fund, deploying the grants, communicating to the community about everything, I really think donors really appreciate a thank you call. So I'm trying to squeeze in thank you calls to everybody who's given above a certain level, and then I'm working my way down. A receptionist can make those phone calls. I mean, donors couldn't give a flying hootie tootie if they're getting a call from a board member, or, yeah, it's nice to hear from the president, but I don't think people necessarily expect that. And even getting a call from a receptionist to say, look, you know, I work for the foundation, calling to thank you for your support. I think those personal calls on top of the formal letters that they get really make a big difference.
Thank you, Francis. Dan, I'm going to have you pop in. Dan Templin from DeKalb.
Thank you. I was just going to share, we're fortunate. I've got about half staff who have elementary age kids who are homeschooling and going through that through the rest of the school year here. And about half of our staff have teenagers. And so they have a lot more flexibility to be able to work. And I'm worried about, I'm starting to think ahead to, you know, our governor canceled school or made school virtual the rest of the school year. But in June, when schools are technically out, I don't know that those childcare options that those staff with younger kids had are even going to be available. And so I'm worried about that, thinking ahead to, you know, we could allow for some remote working, but I think from a mental health perspective, those staff need that support. So I'm wondering if anybody's been thinking about creative solutions to that, like hiring some of the out of work childcare providers, because I don't know that childcare settings are going to be open for business per se, or they might have to really limit their numbers. And I'm wondering about offering on-site childcare with some unemployed educators or you know, childcare providers to allow staff to come to work but have their kids taught or occupied otherwise. So just thinking about those kinds of things, and not sure what summer is going to look like.
Interesting, you know, certainly going to be looking different. I'm going to ask Shelley to have a word, but before, I just want to remind people as we wrap up here, if you have any resources, if you have any responses to something you heard that you weren't able to chime in on, you can email us at webinars@cof.org. That's webinars@cof.org, or me directly, brad.ward@cof.org, and we'll do our best to get those connections made. Shelley, you had your hand raised, so any final thoughts before we officially close this out?
I'm just wondering. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
We can both go. How's that? We can make it fast. First of all, I'm happy to see everyone's Blackbaud contracts are expiring and that we're all leaving them. So we're in that transition as well. And then I just want to put a plug for Arizona Community Foundation. We stole their core team model that they had developed, and we implemented it last summer. And that basically took our admin staff and our grants associates and donor services associates and put them in one core team. That's created a significant amount of flexibility right now. And then all of our donor development folks and our grants folks are doing both right now. So our donor team has learned how to do grants, as we've had to send out about $2 million out the door in the last 3 weeks. And so it's a great opportunity to rewrite job descriptions that you've always wanted to rewrite.
Thank you. Shelley from Wichita.
Oh, my just very simple question. Is anybody providing stipends at home to help with printers, internet, phone usage, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we are giving everyone up to $150 to be able to do that.
Okay,
so, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so with that, I do want to remind you, we have some resources. The legal office hours is on Thursdays. I want to say it's 2 o'clock Eastern time. For those of you who are members with the council, you can send any of your staff. It's turned into a very enjoyable conversation where people work through their legal questions. But as you know, so much of it really is a matter of business decisions, because the law only tells you so much. And so it's a great space to connect, and we rely on your input to make that. I want to thank all of you who did
Brad,
share.
I'm so sorry. It's 3 p.m. 3 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay. Oh, 3 p.m. on Thursday. I see. I thought you were just telling me what time it is right now. But no, Thursday's legal office hours, 3 p.m. Thank you, Danielle. Sorry. Anyways, where was I going? Thank you so much for being here. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all of you. I hope you were able to participate as best we can, but if we can be of assistance to you after this, don't hesitate to let me know. Our CEONet, they're certainly here as well to connect you and engage with you. With that, thank you, everyone. Please have a great rest of your day and a good week, and we will hopefully be in touch. Thank you.